5, 4, 3, 2. Boyo fucking alert. Boyo takeoff. The ship has landed and lifted all at the same time. I'm here with Giacomo, Downlano. How are you, James?
You a stupid boy. You're saying my name wrong. You should go to your mum and eat your spaghetti bolognese.
My name could be Stefano. I don't know what Foxy.
Stefano Le Boio della Vinci.
Is it Le? Do they use Le as well?
I have literally no idea. I'm the least cultured whatsoever outside of England.
Okay, that's interesting. I thought the English and the Italians, you like each other, don't you?
As far as I'm aware, no, not really.
Oh fuck! I don't think the English really like anybody, to be honest.
Well, we're very polite. We'll get along with you, but if the British Empire, it will come back to bite you in the ass if you dare cross us again.
You hate the French. I know that.
Yes, well, because the French and us, we've been warring forever. It's like, stop trying to invade us because you will fail. You did it once. We'll give you once, but all the rest of the time, go away. And your throne also belongs to us. Thank you very much.
The French throne belongs to the British.
A lot of the time, yeah, we've shared that throne, and the English monarch has taken it. So it's like the 100 Years' War, for example. It's like, give me our throne and shut up about it. Thank you, appreciate that.
So this is interesting. So you don't like the French because of royalty things. You probably don't like the Germans either because you spent the last 2 centuries just fucking bombing the shit out of them, out of each other.
100%.
You don't like the Germans.
No.
So you don't like the Italians because they're just too far away, and
we like their food. They're too far away. To be fair, it's almost like the Italians, fine, you know.
Okay.
We'll let them live. How about that?
It's okay. And you don't like you know. I will say that you probably don't get along that well with the Irish.
Well, I don't know about that. My parents were the union of the two, the divine conjunctio, as Jung talked about, between the English and the Irish, the two master races.
How about the Spaniards?
The Spaniards are fine. Spaniards are they're sort of sleepy people. They take their siestas. They're really, really relaxed, really friendly. I'll allow them. Except we did, like Francis Drake, one of the greatest Englishmen of all time. He used to, for fun, go and pillage Spanish ships to just take their gold back to Elizabeth, which is a great hobby for every Englishman to have. You know, read, go gym, pillage the Spanish. It's classic. It's passed down through heritage.
I thought the Spanish were like I know the British people love going down to Spain, and then they like, you know, go to Malaga and stuff like that and hang out. So yeah, I always thought, and the Spanish crown had a big relationship with the English. But then again, I think about the Armadas and all that. To be honest, you don't have no. I don't think you get on with anybody. Maybe the Scandinavians. There's something there.
Maybe, but then they also took our throne twice, about 1,000 years ago. And I don't know about other Englishmen, but I haven't forgiven them for that either.
I'm starting to think that it's probably used to have a problem, my friend. Like, because as far as I know, everybody likes the Irish. Like, I just can't think of anybody in the world that dislikes them. They call them drunks and lazy and ridiculous, but I don't think anybody dislikes them, like, explicitly. Like we have like the French. They're Catholics. They're also French. There's a lot of French here, so the Irish love them. The Italians, Catholics, love them. Spanish, Catholics, love them. Germans, Catholics, love them. The Swedes, we have that Viking stuff. The Icelanders, love them. Then we're like the Brits, man. I don't know. You're like I don't know about you dudes now. It seems like you have a bit of a relationship building to do there.
Well, the reason why people like the Irish, it's not that they like them, it's that they see them as harmless. And they just ignore them.
Do you know, I laugh because that's actually true. Like, oh, the Irish, just they wouldn't hurt a fly, would they? They're just gonna get drunk there in the corner. Fucking England, big bullies building their big empire. Yeah, it's true. I think it could be a little bit of resentment towards the English. Use dickheads though.
Carl Jung was an Englishman, so the greatest man of all time, Englishman.
Oh, like I guess we must address our wonderful audience. Since like Carl Jung is interesting when you listen to him in video because he learned English in Liverpool, I believe, and so yes. he had a German and Liverpool combined accent, which is just the most insane thing you've ever heard. It's like Wayne Rooney and Hitler like mashed into one. Unbelievable. Listen to the two of them. So I'd highly recommend you check that out. It's very, very strange. Very, very strange. Boyo fucking alert. Let's get into Aion. We're here again today. We are going to rip into the final chunk of the self. We're going to try to complete the thought because we've done some deep dive in here. We've tried to articulate out all the angles, the corners, the deep, dark, dusty, spidery cobwebs of the psyche. We're going to try to fill this up together. There's going to be quite a lot of text and paint the picture to set us up for talking about the real big question. And that big question is, what is going to happen over the next couple 100 years? Are we going through a transition towards the next Aion, and how does that work? So far we've painted up this idea of, we've got like the ego, that you've got the shadow, which is all the stuff behind it. You go into that, you find the anima, the animus, that's the male female relationships, and at the very bottom, the very root of that, the furthest, most distant, hardest part to see, there seemed to be this order inside your brain. This idea that when you go to sleep and you turn off your ego and you start to dream. And what this means is that there's a part of your brain that's sending forward ideas that seem to have intelligence in them. So it talks to you. There's a part of your brain, a part of your mind that is not you, that talks to you when you're asleep, and it has intelligence. So it's somehow there and always watching you. It's just such an insane idea, but it's 100%, you can 100% relate to that, because that's absolutely what goes on when you go to sleep. Jung is suggesting at the very bottom of that, there does seem to be this energy center, which he calls the self, which is an ordering center. It is this thing that can send you dreams that make sense. It has this unbelievable ability to conduct premonitions upon your life and tell you where you're going to go. And it's almost like you can see the future or something. Maybe it's a supreme pattern reading machine, or maybe it's God, who knows? But it seems to be connected to your conscience. It seems to be hyper intelligent, and it seems to have this amazing power. We don't really understand it at all. Now, what's so weird about this is, in order to conceptualize such a big idea is super hard. Like, it's very hard to conceptualize something that's invisible. It's very hard to do that. So we need to use symbols. We need to use ideas. And so whatever symbol we place over that tends to represent it to us. This is how we talk to ourselves about what's going on. So if when we're getting in touch with that inner feminine, our feels, that part of our life, we paint on top of it whatever is the anima for the age. So you might have a famous celebrity or something like that. But when it comes to the self, it's a really, really big question, because what's been painted on our self, on our deep mind, on this deep idea of the conscience, has been Christ, has been Jesus Christ. That is fundamentally painted on us. And people will talk a lot about if they believe in Christ or not and all that stuff, but it's almost like it doesn't matter if you believe or not. If you say you believe or not, this is so deeply painted on you that it's literally impossible for you to get rid of, because in order for you to change, to take Christ off the self, you have to deny all the loaded terms wrapped up inside Christ, which is the idea of truth, the idea of standing up for what you believe in, the idea of speaking out and all that stuff. And people think they can sacrifice Christ because he's not real, but they're saying that they're going to sacrifice everything that he represents implicitly. And so they can't really do that. It's impossible for them to not, that's just causes a massive amount of cognitive dissonance in some sense. And so we really need to ask some serious questions of what happens when you change that creature, that person, that being, that symbol that sits on top of this intelligent force within our minds, and what happens to the world when you do that, and what happens to our world when you do that. And it seems like we're going through that process now of transitioning from the old self of the Christ to something new, something that we don't understand. And as we said, it's related to the stars. And yeah, so this is what's setting us up, and these next couple of paragraphs are going to be breaking this down, setting the stage for discussing what that transition might be like. And it's almost like a change in power, a change in king or something like that. Like, are we going to get this point where Christ will come off the throne and a new person will go in on the self throne? A new idea will go on the self throne, or is it more that Christ has been sitting there for a long time and he's about to get challenged? And then he's going to be reborn in a higher level or something like that. Like, what's going to happen with that self throne? And what's that going to relate in our world? Because as Jung says in this, as this process began, as we became more Luciferian, more technological orientated, more into antichrist ideas. So we got more free with the idea of lying and more free with the idea of being degenerate and unvirtuous, if you will. Along with that came millions of deaths, millions of that. You have like, we don't have a conception of how much suffering happened in the last 120 years. Like what happened in Europe at the start of this century was unbelievable in the amount of pain it was. Like, it's so hard to get our heads across that. And that seems to be correlated very tightly to this strange, huge ideological war between the traditional seat of the self, which was this Christ idea, and some type of new energy that's coming up that seemed to arrive around about the 1600s, which is represented as the Faustian scientific spirit. And this is what we're going to churn into. Giacomo, any ideas, sir?
Yes, I do. I can't do any accents. Yeah, so what this lecture is going to be basically is to sum up what we've done so far, and then, as you've said, Stefan, to set up the seat for the next chapter. It's not as glorious as you might think either. Like, just rereading it there, I was like, this is quite depressing, actually. This is quite depressing. Jung's quite an apocalyptic character. He's a prophet by definition, because, you know, he's able to go into his unconscious and speak out what might be happening. And that's exactly what he lays out. He lays out what's happening psychically right now. He lays out what's happened psychically in the past. And then he's going to make a prediction as happens in the future. And it's like, not only is it terrifying, but it also puts the responsibility directly onto you. And it's like, that's something which, like, if that doesn't make you terrified, then you have no idea what that actually means. It means literally the fate of the world rests on your shoulders, which is horrendous. This would be a very good, it should be a good summary lecture as well. So if you've missed any of the previous ones, this would be a nice one to hop into and I guess get an overall picture before we begin phase 2 of this terrifying yet delectable book.
Yes, quite. Let's turn into it, man. Let's not pander.
It's not pander. Pander so that every loser is watching this. Jesus. People, losers, my good friends, Romans, countrymen. We're on page 30, paragraph 58. I'm going to read to you.
In a soft ASMR voice.
This knowledge is an essential prerequisite for any integration. That is to say, a content can only be integrated when its double aspect has become conscious and when it is grasped not merely intellectually, but understood according to its feeling value. Intellect and feeling, however, are difficult to put into one harness. They conflict with one another by definition. Whoever identifies with an intellectual standpoint will occasionally find his feeling confronting him, like an enemy in the guise of the anima. Conversely, an intellectual animus will make violent attacks on the feeling standpoint. Therefore, anyone who wants to achieve the difficult feat of realizing something not only intellectually, but according to its feeling value, must, for better or worse, come to grips with the anima-animus problem in order to open the way for a higher union, a conjunctio oppositorium. This is an indispensable prerequisite for wholeness. Have you got any thoughts on that paragraph?
I'll touch on it briefly because this is the premise that I set up in the title. Hello, people. The idea is, in my head, as I said, you've got that seat of the self, and it's kind of hard to understand what something like Christ would mean, because intellectually it's like, oh, was he a real historical person? Did he exist and all that? And you can go down that route. You can be like, what did it mean? What that means? What's the science of Christ? What does he mean? What is he talking about? Is it true? Is it logical? Did he rise from the dead? Is that even possible? How does the physics of that work out? And you can get obsessed with that. And that's actually is a side to it. What was his rational? What was going on there? But on the other hand, the other side of the symbol is the emotional power of it. Like when you're stuck there and you're struggling and you think about his story, and it gives you this vibe of being like, he fought through pain, so I can fight through pain as well. So there's the dualized way of looking at these symbols. And in order for us to advance to truly getting a visceral understanding of these things, we need to be able to combine them both and realize that there's two sides to this stuff, and that it's not two sides to an argument or anything like that. It's not like you have to look at, was Christ historical, or maybe here's all the proof that he wasn't historical or something like that. It's more that you have to be able to see the psychological aspects to it. You have to see the rational way of looking at the Jesus story, but you also have to look at the emotional way of looking at the Jesus story and how it affects us and whatnot. And all of this stuff wrapped in together is the key towards you getting a dynamic understanding of how these symbols work inside your mind. Like, say, if you had a dream character or something like that, it's about building up a bigger picture of looking at this. And this is precisely the type of behavior you need to engage in order to develop your mind, to become better at seeing things from different psychological angles, seeing things from a rational sense, seeing things from a more emotional sense. And that will bring you that will make you way better at understanding these big concepts and the depth behind them. Like if we're talking about something like Christ coming again, or the Antichrist coming to challenge his position, you will realize that that's not some intellectual war that's going on. It's intellectual, but it's coming with an emotional thing. It will change the culture, and that will eventually lead to a physical difference. So people will start off intellectually as being like, oh, Jesus isn't real. That has already happened. And then you will start to see people acting less moral. The moral relativism will come in, and people will be like, morals don't matter. You can just give into your feelings a lot more. That's already happened. And along with that comes a very strange phenomenon, such as like certain really, really powerful forces are in play now, where like mass violence is on the cards and all that. And it's a very layered picture that you need to paint you need to understand in order to really get what's going on, and the gravitas of what Jung is talking about here, because it's so abstract. If you don't have this rich tapestry for interpreting these abstractions, they kind of brush off your mind a little bit, and you don't get why what Jung is saying here might like be the most intense thing you ever read.
I'm going to make this personal for a second. What Jung's suggesting here as well is you can't just do this in a day. Something I've noticed. Now, when I was still on Twitter, because I'm a brash 22-year-old, and I used to hang out in, we'll say, philosophy crowds. And what people will do is they'll find one random philosopher and they'll make that their god. And then someone else will find another philosopher and they'll make that their god. Then they'll just clash them together by being the mouthpiece for that philosopher. And being versed in Jung, I will say, I realized that all of these people are completely and utterly wrong. Because one, they don't believe anything that they're actually saying. They're just being a mouthpiece for the philosopher. But they're lacking a strength of psyche. They're just saying words. And this is something Jung has to keep stressing here. It's like there's a difference between knowing the name of something and actually knowing what something is. That happens to be a huge problem for what the hell religious belief meant. You can imagine going back in the day to when the Bible, for example, was first formed, or a religious text. We have no idea what the feeling value was around that. We just have the words. And so it gets diluted and washed over a long period of time. So it's like, if you're going to do this properly, you have to actually confront things not in an intellectual manner, like, oh, well, I've read Aion now. I've integrated my shadow because I understand what Carl Jung was talking about. It's like, no. You don't just get to integrate your shadow. It doesn't happen. You don't just get to integrate your anima like it's some kind of challenge. It's like, no, this is a serious... And Jung said in separate works, it's like, this doesn't happen to everybody. Like, you've got to bear in mind that things like the shadow and the anima and the animus, these are omnipresent forces. But it's not like a challenge that you say to yourself, I'm going to go forward to reach God. It doesn't work like that. Very, very few people have ever managed it. It's like the Holy Grail. I really, really love this because Jung was really fascinated with the image of the knight. For some reason, he built his little stone castle and he started engraving shit on the walls of his stone castle. And he would like vision himself as a knight, which is also what I did a few months ago now. And he was like, individuation is the Holy Grail. It's like it's there and it's not there. Like no one ever gets it, but it's still there and it's still a worthwhile quest, right? Even if you can't reach the Holy Grail, should you not bother? That's actually a really good question. It's the same thing with the Christ question as well. It's like, if Jesus Christ isn't a real thing, if there's something about him that's not quite right, does that make it not worthwhile to go and figure it out and to go and reach him? Like Jung is saying, no, it's perfectly worthwhile. Just know that you have to use your logos, your intellect, and you have to use your eros, your feeling factor, in order to do this. Unite them properly. And for a man, if you're a man listening to this, it's your eros you have to come up against, your emotions primarily. And if you're a woman, a sweet woman, the sweetest of all sweet women, then it's the logos you have to come up against. It's the intellect that come up against. And once you can do this, well, Jung will explain in a moment what might happen to you.
That's great. Should we power forward, sir?
Paragraph
59.
Although wholeness seems at first sight to be nothing but an abstract idea, like anima and animus, it is nevertheless empirical insofar as it is anticipated by the psyche in the form of spontaneous or autonomous symbols. These are the quaternity or mandala symbols, which occur not only in the dreams of modern people who have never heard of them, but are widely disseminated in the historical records of many people and many epochs. Their significance as symbols of unity and totality is amply confirmed by history, as well as by empirical psychology. What at first looks like an abstract idea stands in reality for something that exists and can be experienced, that demonstrates its a priori presence spontaneously. Wholeness is thus an objective factor that confronts the subject independently of him, like anima or animus. And just as the latter have a higher position in the hierarchy than the shadow, so wholeness lays claim to a position and a value superior to those of the syzygy. The syzygy seems to represent at least a substantial portion of it, if not actually two halves of the totality formed by the royal brother-sister pair, and hence the tension of opposites from which the divine child is born as the symbol of unity. Any thoughts, sir?
No, I think we can. There's lots to say here, but I think we can. I think we can power through, because I think I've set that stage up quite well. What I was talking about before, like it is that idea of you've got these. We've talked about this before. This hierarchy of gods, the pagan problem, where it's like, why do people believe in paganism? We can't just say our ancestors were LARPing idiots. Like they took this shit serious, and it's because these pagan symbols, these gods, these symbols sat on top of their emotions properly. Like you have just like you have a seat at the very back of your mind for Jesus Christ. You also have a seat for your anger. Your anger needs to be represented somehow with a symbol, and that would very, very, very effectively sit on Aries. Beauty, that concept, would Aphrodite. Like these things sit there perfectly. They are there. So the pagan gods make sense in some sense. They have a place. But as you see all these emotions charge up, they all unify towards one super emotion. You can think of it this way: all your instincts exist to help you survive in life. Your sex instinct exists to help you procreate, and your love is to help you bond so that you create children. There's a logos, a logic, a reason to all your instincts. All your emotions have a reason. So all your pagan gods within you have a purpose. And the thing that unifies them, what they all point towards, is this sort of higher intelligence, which is like the intelligence of your DNA, if you want to be a biologist about this, and say that the fact that all your instincts align towards making you live a great, successful human life. That is almost the same position as the self, and that is a similar position to how we perceive God. The way we say that, like, intelligent design, for example, is that idea of, oh yeah, all of our instincts point towards something. And so wholeness is the top of that hierarchy, and it is about getting that wholesome understanding of, like, this is the order of life, this is what all my instincts are for, and this is good. And then that pagan idea, the syzygy down below, and the lower you get, the more complicated it becomes. It is all about deifying those emotions, and I don't even think that's wrong anymore. It's just that it's not the top level of resolution.
It's Jung. He's got a really simple worldview here, even though it doesn't sound simple. He's like, there are certain things that exist: masculine, feminine, logos, eros. That's it. That's the psychic. That's the psychic totality. That's like the self almost. But there does seem to be something else above it. So it's like, so in Genesis 2, God takes the rib out of Adam and then creates Eve, and then he goes, now therefore, I think it's Adam who says it, and he's like, now because this has happened, my Lord spake they, saying that I will leave my mother and father and cleave unto thy woman, and we shall become one flesh. So it's like man, woman, create whole, logos, eros. That's it. There's nothing else. There's nothing else. That's what's most important. But we will
quiet. We will press onwards, people.
Yes, quiet.
Getting closer and closer to Jesus Christ himself.
Unity and totality stand at the highest point on the scale of objective values, because their symbols can no longer be distinguished from the imago Dei. That means the image of God. Hence, all statements about the God image also apply to the empirical symbols of totality. Experience shows that individual mandalas are symbols of order, and that they occur in patients principally during times of psychic disorientation or reorientation. As magic circles, they bind and subdue the lawless powers belonging to the world of darkness and depict or create an order that transforms the chaos into a cosmos. The mandala at first comes into the conscious mind as an unimpressive point or dot, and a great deal of hard and painstaking work, as well as the integration of many projections, are generally required before the full range of the symbol can be anything like completely understood. If this insight were purely intellectual, it could be achieved without much difficulty. For the worldwide pronouncements about the God within us and above us, about Christ and the corpus mysticum, the personal and suprapersonal Atman, etc., are all formulations that can easily be mastered by the philosophic intellect. This is the common source of the illusion that one is then in possession of the thing itself. But actually, you little fucktards, one has acquired nothing more than its name, despite the age-old prejudice that the name magically represents the thing and that it is sufficient to pronounce the name in order to posit the thing's existence. In the course of the millennia, the reasoning mind has been given every opportunity to see through the futility of this conceit, though that has done nothing to prevent the intellectual mastery of a thing from being accepted at its face value. It is precisely our experiences in psychology which demonstrate as plainly as could be wished that the intellectual grasp of a psychological fact produces no more than the concept of it, and that a concept is no more than a name. These intellectual counters can be bandied about easily enough. They pass lightly from hand to hand, for they have no weight or substance. They sound full, but are hollow, and though purporting to designate a heavy task and an obligation, they commit us to nothing. The intellect is undeniably useful in its own field, but is a great cheat and illusionist outside of it whenever it tries to manipulate.
Values.
Yeah, it's quiet. Again, it is this idea of there is a position in the back of your mind to represent this very strange and intuitive idea of an unbelievable amount of intelligence. There's something, as I said, when you go to sleep and your ego shuts off and you start dreaming, you have that strange experience of something that is not your waking self delivering to you stories that have premonitions and understanding and intelligence in them, it seems. And that's a very, very strange idea. And we don't know how to represent that. It's so complicated, we don't know how to represent it. It's such a big idea. So it starts off usually as appearing as some magic dot in the back of your mind. And in your dreams, it appears as a dot. And then you can flesh that out into a mandala, as he's talking about here. And that is your mind coming to consciousness of the fact that there is something ordered in the world and it's in you, and so that's you painting the mandala, that's the ordering circle, and it's you bringing that symbol to life, and that heals people. Like, people often describe these experiences of painting a mandala, and it just brings them relaxation. Jung would do this in some of his other books. He'd get some of his patients to draw mandalas, and over time the mandala, they start off really shit, and over time they become like super complicated and cool and really like artistically sophisticated. And it's a very, very interesting phenomenon. Another thing to note is that in Warrior, Magician, Lover, King, that you have the guy who says that he takes in a load of men who are going through crises, and when their psyches get sorted out, when they clean up their psyches, suddenly the men would start dreaming of a little child who's the divine child, the symbol of the divine child, and that would come along with these feelings of hope and inspiration, and they stop feeling pessimistic about the future, and at the same time that manifests as a desire to have children. And so it shows you, I think that's I think that's essentially empirical, is that these things are psychologically real. When you start having these dreams of this certain symbol, it comes along with an experience, a perspective that is a valuable instinct getting turned on. And so this is, Jung is saying, the highest instinct seems to be this ordering circle instinct, the mandala instinct, the self instinct, the God instinct. Any thoughts, James?
Yeah, I got a few thoughts here. He's saying a very similar thing to Richard Feynman. I really, really like Richard Feynman. He's a proper based physicist. And Feynman says, Feynman, he's like sitting there or whatever, and he's telling a story to the BBC, and he's like, just because you know the name of something doesn't mean you know anything about it. In many ways, that's like the most damning critique of the education system I have ever seen in my entire life, in one sentence. Because what is it? It's like learn a whole bunch of facts and names. It tells you nothing. It's like I was watching, what was it? I think it was Child Genius or something on TV, because I'm quite competitive and I'm like, I'm fairly smart. I'm smarter than you child geniuses. And turns out that like some of them are so lightning fast, and I get really angry. I have to turn it off because clearly it's been edited. They're not doing it that fast, right? But they'll be asked things like, what's the name of this creature in Latin? I'm sitting there like, maybe it's rage because they're smarter than me, right? Maybe. I'm like, they know nothing about that fish. They know its name. It carries no weight to it. So it's like, in many ways, this might be a critique of like the mass and like religious ceremonies today and religious speakers today. You know, Peterson actually said that he doesn't go to mass because he doesn't believe that people actually believe the words that they're saying. And it's like, you got to think about that for a minute and be like, what does it mean to believe in Jesus Christ? What does that mean? Because like, I've met people before, they're like Jehovah's Witness types, and they're like, James, I think I've told this story before, so I won't repeat it again. They're like, James, you have to say the name of Jesus. You've got to accept him. Say, I accept Jesus. And, you know, there might be some psychological significance to actually saying, Jesus, my Lord, I accept you. It's like, that's not what it means. That's really not what it means. And it's also, funnily enough, not what Jesus says in the Bible either. He's like, you can blaspheme against me. That's fine, boyos. But don't you dare blaspheme against the Holy Ghost. And I read that. I think it was Luke's Gospel or Mark's Gospel, and I was like, that is so smart. So it doesn't matter what you say about me, but you can't deny the Holy Ghost. And what's the Holy Ghost? It's like the conscience. It's that feeling, that unity, the wholeness.
This is where the Bible becomes a dick, though, man, because I'm pretty sure he says later on that anybody who denies me now, I will deny them in front of my Father. So just be wary.
That's said in the same paragraph. He's like, if you deny me, but he says you can blaspheme against me. And it's like, that's a strange little distinction. What does it mean to deny him exactly? Does it mean words? And I don't think that's what it means. I think it's a unity of the logos and the eros together. It's something else besides say it. You know, it's like,
oh shit.
What does that actually mean? And that really hit me as powerful. So it's like, essentially in one sentence, I guess, to believe is not a statement of the will. It's not the will saying I believe. It's something else. It's something else. It's a unity of logos and eros together. And once you do that enough times, as you continue to integrate the collective unconscious, this little dot that might appear in your dreams, it might get a little bit more fleshed out, and then the divine child, and then you will go get loads of wives like an Islamic overlord, and you will populate the earth with all of your divine children, and Jung will bless you from his seat on the right-hand side of the Father.
Yes, quite. Uncooked Carl says, I've made it, boys. Come join me. Let's power through. We got plenty to go through here.
It would seem that one can pursue any science with the intellect alone except psychology, whose subject, the psyche, has more than two aspects mediated by sense perception and thinking. The function of value feeling is an integral part of our conscious orientation and ought not to be missing in a psychological judgment of any scope. Otherwise, the model we are trying to build of the real process will be incomplete. Every psychic process has a value quality attached to it, namely its feeling tone. This indicates the degree to which the subject is affected by the process, or how much it means to him, insofar as the process reaches consciousness at all. It is through the affect that the subject becomes involved and so comes to feel the whole weight of reality. The difference amounts roughly to that between a severe illness that one just reads about in a textbook and a real illness that you might have. In psychology, one possesses nothing unless one has experienced it in reality. Hence, a purely intellectual insight is not enough, because one knows only the words and not the substance of the thing from inside. Any thoughts?
No, I think power on. I think we're all good.
Just read to the end of the damn book. There are far more people who are afraid of the unconscious than one would expect. They're even afraid of their own shadow. And when it comes to the anima animus, this fear turns to panic. For the syzygy does indeed represent the psychic contents that erupt into consciousness in a psychosis, most clearly of all in the paranoid forms of schizophrenia. The overcoming of this fear is often a moral achievement of unusual magnitude, and yet it is not the only condition that must be fulfilled on the way to a real experience of the self. This must hit hard for you, Stefan, because you are actually a paranoid schizophrenic. Do you agree?
I have a lot to say on this. Yes, of course. You're just an Englishman, which is essentially worse and more insane. Calling an Irishman a paranoid schizophrenic is like it's a truism. It's
I'm just a piece of your imagination at this point. I don't actually exist.
I wouldn't be
Stefan's
fucking
managed
surprised,
to
man.
fragment another personality out on the other side of the camera. It's insane.
I do often hallucinate degenerates and sodomites, so it makes sense. Yes.
Oh, that was meant to be funny. Oh, okay.
I've got a lot to say on this. Yes, of course. So the idea of fear of the unconscious, I think that's a very interesting one, because one thing I noticed a lot from talking to people in my life is that they have notions about how the world works. They really get what's going on. You know, they know what's up, they know what's down, and I am much the same. I'm like, I know how things are going. I know the solutions. I know the way forward and all that. You often meet people who are being like, we have to do this in order to stop all this fighting in the world, in order to stop all this warring on Facebook, in order to stop all these like the problem with politics and discourse is that we don't have this based way of talking and all this, and it's this arrogance, as we say, of people thinking that they've mechanically got the solutions. And as I said, like I suffer from this too. I remember when I was younger, I was like, how do I save the world? I know exactly the way forward. Charge this direction. And people are very brave when it comes to coming up with plans, I've noticed. People are very brave when it comes to asserting what's going on in reality. People are not very brave when it comes to turning around and saying, what the fuck is going on inside my head? What is going on with me that could be wrong? Like, people are not very brave at finding their weak spots, which is very strange when you think about it, because your weak spots, rationally or practically or objectively, if you can find your weak spots and sort them out, you'll be able to grow way more than if you just pretend they don't exist. Like in the gym, if you have a weak muscle, it's going to hold you back. You're the weakest link. It's going to hold you back compared to if you just fix that motherfucker, and then you can move forward and become way stronger. So surely if you wanted to succeed, you would be absolutely obsessed about your weak spots. And when it comes to your mind, if you wanted to succeed, you wouldn't be just talking a lot of shit. You would be absolutely obsessed with finding out what you don't know, what you are unconscious of. And that would lead you to this space of what's going on with the self, the psyche, the crazy thoughts and all that. But the problem is that people aren't brave enough to face their unconscious, and the thing that gets in the way is that emotion of fear. They've got this wall of emotion that they can't get by. So they're able to reason, they're able to talk shit, but they're not able to go into their fear, overcome that emotion, even though they have this elaborate plan about how the world works and what the future is and what's the right way to do things. They don't have any true based power or courage or warrior energy to confront the fear of themselves even, and turn around and look into their psyche and see, for example, with the idea of Jesus, they would have all these conceptions about the world needs to turn transhuman. We need to throw away Christianity and all religions in order to move forward. That people would have notions like this, and they would be out there in the world preaching en masse and getting agreed with, because there's lots of people like this, and they're like, yeah, I've got it all figured out. But they wouldn't be able to turn into their psyche because it's too scary and look at why they deny Jesus. And what's so fucking interesting is that their entire personality is defined as denial of everything Christ represents, as opposed to actually representing anything original. Like something like Nietzsche, for example. Nietzsche, I love the man. I love him, and I think he was a very sincere and honest man. But I get this weird feeling that his entire philosophy was premised on him saying Jesus isn't real. It's like a teenage reality. It's like I am not going to develop a personality. I'm going to define my personality as a rebellion against what is established.
He actually did that, didn't he? He was like Dionysus versus the crucified.
Yeah,
me versus the crucified. It's like, what the hell does that mean?
And he warred with that. Eventually, he called himself the crucified. In the end, he said, like, I am the crucified. That was when he was going schizophrenic, when he was going insane. And maybe that was what happened to him. Maybe he had spent his whole life rationalizing against this, and then at some point He just let it in. And then it came in and ripped him apart because he was like a strong head. So he spent way too long fighting against it. And when he let it in, when he confronted that really deep part, which was the seat of the self, and he had done all this shit with like Zarathustra and boasted that he was the murderer of Christ and all that. And then he got confronted with that true seat of his soul. He went through this. He had to fight between Dionysus and the crucified. It was a war between Christ and Satan in some sense. Because what Nietzsche represent Dionysus as wasn't something original. It was sort of antichrist. This is what's so hard about it, is that Nietzsche couldn't get out of that dynamic between Christ and Satan. And so his self went for a war between Dionysus crucified, Dionysus crucified, Dionysus crucified. It didn't say Dionysus is the Ubermensch. It didn't go Ubermensch, new thing. It fought between two old things because the Jesus thing was defining him. And this is astounding because this isn't everywhere in the modern world. Like everybody who's a scientist is like, if you bring up anything Christian to them, they will almost like, they'll just be like, no, it's bullshit, because they're not defining themselves assertive on truth. They're doing it as anti-Christian in some sense. And in order to develop as a person, like you could be a great scientist, but if you actually study your psychology, you could probably also be somewhat religious as well. Apparently there's loads of Christian scientists, for example. And so that's a super interesting problem. And it's something that Jung's saying is that the biggest problem to this is people are afraid to look at it. It's fear that's holding you back.
It's bloody terrifying. Jesus Christ, dude. It's okay.
I wonder how I'm doing it, man. I wonder how I'm doing it. Like, I'm sure I'm cooking on some shit. Like, I'm sure it's definitely there. I just don't know what it is because it's unconscious. So you don't know.
Well, this is the thing. It's like most people will frame it as you did there, and it's definitely correct. It's like you don't want to see your weak spots, and that's weird because you should want to see your weak spots. It's like, wait a minute, why would you want to see your weak spots? Because the world is such a horrible, harsh place, and everything that you like. Imagine, dear viewer, listener, watcher, Romans country, your life. You know, you've got job and you've got family and you've got values and beliefs and you've got actions. And when you really start to examine what they are, if they're not based on something rock solid, everything comes tumbling down. It's the death of God problem in your own life. It's like, that doesn't work. Like the value under it doesn't work. Everything goes down. So it's like, I can't blame people for not wanting to look at their weak spots. It's like, it's a coping mechanism. You know, it might not be bold and honest and truthful, but it's like, we're still trying to survive. So it's like, yeah, you may be completely messing up in loads of different areas. But the thing is, what's the consequence of not looking at them? You know?
Do you know what it is?
Is collapse inevitable anyway?
Do you know what it is if you don't have the courage to look at your weak spots, you don't have the authority to speak about anything really. Like people have to take the responsibility for their fear. And I don't think it's a cuck situation for you to be like, I'm afraid of confronting something, so I won't speak on it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that's cool. That's cool. That's absolutely cool. Like, we can let you off with that. But when someone is too afraid to like stare into their unconscious, but then they go tell you how the world works, you're like, you are full of shit. And you're not even full of shit. You're dangerous full of shit, because that's when you start bullshitting yourself. And when you start spreading your bullshit like a disease into the world, you fuck things up, man. As I said, Karl Marx is a brilliant example of this, because he was entirely premised on talking about capital and how the world should work, and his life was a disaster. His wife was starving. I think his children were dirty all the time. They like slept in cold. He was a terrible man. He had no competence for money and all that stuff, and he just ranted and raved about how to change the world and all that. And his ideas were the intellectual framework for a genocide that you cannot believe. 60 million people died in Russia because of what he did. 100 million, I think, died in China. These numbers are staggering, and the way they killed them was fucking frightening. And it was all because he was able to sit down there and be like, this is how the world should work. All right, it was all because like a big powerful, an important part of that step was a man like him who wasn't able to face himself properly and was freely able to say, religion is the opiate of the masses. I am woke. Look how fucking woke you are, man. You're a fucking murderer. That's all you are. And it's that type of energy that's so astounding, is that people, it's a like, I guess you could say it's a flaw in human psychology, in that we have that thing where we facing our weaknesses is actually dangerous in some sense, because it makes you overthink. But if you don't do it and you develop the arrogance to talk about it, it makes you more dangerous in a more spiritual way, a sense. And so when you get religions like Christianity that try shove you in your head and say, sort yourself out first, like go into your psychology, sort that stuff out, it does bully you into these positions where you're like, I can't just go ranting and talking shit with authority when I'm actually just a coward on the inside.
Yeah, there's just something else that you hit on there as well. It was like, if you deny the symbol, so we'll say Jesus is a symbol of something. If you deny the symbol, does that mean that everything else goes along with it?
Yeah.
That is so scary. It's like, if you say, I don't believe in Jesus Christ, it's like, what does that mean? What exactly does that mean? Does that mean that you don't believe that you do not believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God and a historical man or whatever? Or does it mean that you reject what he stands for? It's like, I don't know. It's like, I don't know. Is that a part of it? Because if it is, it's absolutely terrifying. This happened to me, like in my personal life, after reading this stuff, going through this material, and I was like, I have no idea what's real anymore. I have no idea, like, what is real? Right? It's like, of course, like biology is real. We'll just say that. It's like Stefan is here on the other side of this thing, right? That's real. But in terms of values and principles and the way you should act and the way the world should go and psychic health, what is real and what's a lie? And I was like, okay, what can I possibly cling on to? And it's like Descartes' thing was, I think, therefore I am. And then Peterson's thing was suffering is real. So I was like, okay, I'm going to throw myself in with, I'm going to join the war, basically. I'm going to join this war that Nietzsche was a part of and that Jung was a part of, a war in the soul. It's like, I'm going to throw things in with the at very least, the metaphorical truth of Christianity is real. Real. You can't deny it. It's like, even if Jesus wasn't a historical man, it's like, he's real. And then his counterpart, Satan, is real. That's the basis. It's like, and then from there you build up. Rather than what most people do is they'll go and they'll be like, yes, I'm woke. Look, I've got, that's how the world works. It's like, you know nothing. It's in what's probably 40 Towers. You know nothing.
Yes.
You do. You know absolutely nothing. It's like, but it's the same thing of you, same thing of me, same thing everybody watching. It's like, all the fluff that you say doesn't matter. It's the values and the principles and whether or not they're rock solid. And the rock solid aspect comes from whether or not they're archetypal, because then they've existed for 2 million years or so. It's like, so where are you? Where are you, dear listener, going to throw in your support to? Which archetypal energy? Which principle?
It's a very hard problem. It's a big question. It's a big question of our age, because you have that idea premised that we're suggesting here, that if you deny something like Jesus, sound like fucking Puritans at this point, but if you deny Jesus, what do you throw out with the baby? Or what do you throw out the what? Maybe that's a good metaphor for it. Maybe that's a good metaphor for it. It's like, all right, if you throw out the divine child, the baby, what's the bathwater? Like, what is the bathwater that goes with it? And the question is, like E. Michael Jones frames this, is that if you're destroying Christ, you're destroying the idea of logos. And he premises the idea of Judaism, why it's such a difficult religion to integrate into Christian cultures, is because they fundamentally denied logos in inventing that religion. And so they become quite naturally subversive. That's the way that works. And this is a problem which is going on in the modern world, is that you get an institution like science that is anti-Christian by its nature. Well, or according to its theory, or the culture will say is anti-Christian. But that's a big problem, because science is supposed to be premised on logos, but it's not if it's anti-Christ. If Christ represents that, if it represents logos, principles, truth, which is all wrapped into that brilliant word. And so if you get this institution like science that is claiming that it's anti-Christian, what that means is that the entire premise is not about finding the truth, but about finding something that's not Christian. So it becomes like, again, it becomes a Richard Dawkins movement. And what's astounding about that is modern science is considered unreliable. Almost 50% of the experiments are considered unrepeatable and unreliable, because there's been bias, money, and just general human error that's mixed up into the endeavor itself. So that culture denying that actually damaged the entire premise of science to make it in some way nearly useless. And the only valuable people in the scientific movement would be the engineers, who were just practical about stuff and like, all right, I don't really care what the theories are anymore. I know these things work, and then we're just going to build off that. And so this is an unbelievably difficult problem, because if you get anybody in the modern world who's got a political view, a world view, and all that stuff, like if you've got some India wanker who's just like, yeah, I travel the East, I'm big into like yoga and chakras and all that stuff, and it's like, but what are you like? What are you throwing away? Are you like against Christianity? It's like, yeah, I don't like it. It's too restrictive. And I'm like, what do you throw out with that? Do you throw out your logos then? So what do these people, where's their, if you have no logos, where's your value? Where's your base? Where's your set of principles? Like, it's not like the world needs less principles right now. This is exactly what we need. And you have all these people doing all this stuff, and they're throwing away this stuff. And it's a very interesting problem, because Jung puts you in this position where it's almost black and white. It's like, this Christ is at the bottom of yourself, as much as you don't want it to be there, as much as you want to be able to engage in Nietzsche's project of creating the Übermensch. And I'd love that. I'd love if I could create something new. But Jung's like, you can't, bro. Like, maybe you can, but you have to get over this step first. And this step is not fucking straightforward. This step is like, can you deny 2,000 years of history possibly from God himself in order to create your new thing? It's like, whoa, man, I don't know what to do about that. Like, that's a really hard problem. So, yeah, something to think about.
Yeah. So I'm gonna crack on, because Jung's gonna drop some black pills and red pills and purple pills and every other type of pill. Paragraph 63.
Page 33.
The shadow, the syzygy, and the self are psychic factors of which an adequate picture can be formed only on the basis of a fairly thorough experience of them. Just as these concepts arose out of an experience of reality, so they can be elucidated only by further experience. Philosophical criticism will find everything to object to in them, unless it begins by recognizing that they are concerned with facts, and that the concept is simply an abbreviated description of these facts. Or definition of these facts, sorry. Such criticism has as little effect on the object as zoological criticism on a duck-billed platypus. It is not the concept that matters. The concept is only a word, a counter, and has meaning and use only because it stands for a certain sum of experience. Unfortunately, I cannot pass on this experience to my fine public. I've tried in a number of publications with the help of case material to present the nature of these experiences and also the method of obtaining them. Wherever my methods were really applied, the facts I give have been confirmed. One could see the moons of Jupiter, even in Galileo's day, if one took the trouble to use his telescope. Outside the narrower field of professional psychology, these figures meet with understanding from all who have any knowledge of comparative mythology. They have no difficulty in recognizing the shadow as the adverse representative of the dark chthonic world, a figure whose characteristics are universal. The syzygy is immediately comprehensible as the psychic prototype of all divine couples. Finally, the self, on account of its empirical peculiarities, proves to be the eidos behind the supreme ideas of unity and the totality that are inherent in all monotheistic and monoistic systems. Is he offering a little red pill to the pagans, saying you're less developed than Christianity, you little cucks?
I've many things to talk about there. I'm just going to quickly tell someone in the chat. Yes, we will definitely do a small Q&A at the end. We're just going to try rip through. We've literally got two paragraphs left, so we'll rip through that, and then we will be done. Hit up a Q&A. All right, sweet. Yeah, let's get through this. I think one thing that's very important is that he's pretty much murdering the idea of the humanities, the modern humanities. Like, the modern humanities are just absolutely ruined because they can't accept these premises that he's pushing here. Because in order for them to deny the irrationality of accepting a symbol like Christ as having this transcendent idea in like, it's not a sort of super intellectual thing to break down this Jesus is the seed of all psyche in the West, and they throw that out and they start this new scientific endeavor. And then that scientific endeavor, not that I'm against science, but the sort of culture around it moves into the humanities, and then they start this whole contextual analysis, and they start subverting the whole idea of humanities, which is, how do we keep the culture healthy? How do we keep the culture healthy? And if humans have a software, which is our psychology, the humanities are almost like the giant coding think tanks of like, how do we code that software correctly? And what someone like Jung does is discovers that the coding for human software is made out of symbols. That's the way that we do it. And if you're not well versed in symbols because you don't understand that symbols involve you to be a bit more of a feels type person, you throw out everything you become almost incapable of doing the job properly. And so you see modern humanities have lost that ability to do that. They've got too obsessed with something else. There's something really, really subverted about them. I would put it squarely on.
This is also why art is screwed, I think, for the exact same reasons as you're saying, because it's like humans create art and poetry. We always have. It's like, why the hell would we do that? And it's like they encode something which mere facts and analysis cannot encode.
Yes,
so it's like if you get rid of religion and therefore that method of conveying information, we'll say art goes, poetry goes, everything goes, and it just becomes, you know, a really obnoxious little critical theorist going, yeah, well, context and facts and blah 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 blah. You're missing half the human experience. You're missing it, and then what happens to our souls? I mean, Jung will tell us, but carry on.
And that's a really, really, really good point. I actually think that's a better way to frame it. As I said, you have that ego that turns off, that's you, and then this hidden intelligence comes out and gives you dreams. Like, is the artist really a creator or merely a conduit for something higher, such as whatever is that voice that speaks through the dreams, the symbol creating part of your soul that's not you, and you merely witness it? Like in dreams. So is the artist just making their dreams manifest in the real world? Like if I was to describe myself as an artist, like in my artist mode, I don't really think I'm making it. I'm more like, it's like I'm discovering shapes, that type of sense. And the real artist is a vessel. It just came from the chat. Like that's exactly what we're talking about here. And so humanities are almost like about finding, like humanities is like the dream studying section of human culture. The artists bring forward all these dreams, and maybe the humanities is about creating a space for the artists to do that, but they don't do this anymore. And then the humanities sit down, they study these dreams, and they're like, all right, what's going on in our culture? What's our dream reading situation going on? But if they fundamentally deny the idea of dreams making sense, like what the fuck? Like they've lost that entire premise, and they do default into the critical theory stuff, and it's a subversive thing. What's interesting is that correlates with a denial of logos, which is weird because you'd imagine logos would be like logic, but no, logos has space for those big ideas as well, for those more esoteric and floozy ideas. So it's an interesting thought, a very interesting thought. And I'll just say quickly, eidos is a Greek word for essence type of species. So big ideas are related to big symbols. And I think that's an important thing for the next paragraph.
Let's crack on to the next paragraph. 65 out of 67 in this chapter. It's getting exciting. Little drum roll there. I regard these parallels as important because it is possible through them to relate so-called metaphysical concepts, which have lost their root connection with natural experience, to living universal psychic processes so that they can recover their true and original meaning. In this way, the connection is re-established between the ego and projected contents, now formulated as metaphysical ideas. Unfortunately, as already said, the fact that metaphysical ideas exist and are believed in does nothing to prove the actual existence of their content or of the object they refer to, although the coincidence of idea and reality in the form of a special psychic state, a state of grace, we might say, should not be deemed impossible, even if the subject cannot bring it about by an act of will. Once metaphysical ideas have lost their capacity to recall and evoke the original experience, they have not only become useless, but prove to be actual impediments on the road to wider development. One clings to possessions that have once meant wealth, and the more ineffective, incomprehensible, and lifeless they become, the more obstinately people cling to them. Naturally, it is only sterile ideas that they cling to. Living ideas have content and riches enough, so there is no need to cling to them. Thus, in the course of time, the meaningful turns into meaninglessness. This is unfortunately the fate of metaphysical ideas. That's so damning. That is so unbelievably damning. It's like, because he's attacking everybody, including religious people, at the same time. Yeah. Because it's like he's not like, what the hell are these religious ideas? You know, it's almost like whatever the religion phenomenology was when the mythological and the real touch when Jesus was around will say, what's happened to it? It's decayed. So is the mass a true reflection of that? Is the words written on the page a true reflection of that? You know, does marriage mean the same thing in the eyes of God now? Is it all the same thing? Does praying mean the same thing? We don't know. So they're clinging on to things without actually viscerally feeling them. So he's not just attacked the philosophers and the humanities and everything. He's also attacking religious people too, because that's what Carl Jung does.
He's like the Uber Nietzsche. He's super like we're very pro-Christian on this. We do like the Christian religion. It is the most based on. It built Europe, like the greatest empire to ever exist. But Jung does absolutely murder the idea that we just laid out there. Like, he's such a dick. He set us up with all these floozy. He was like, all these promises, and we're like, maybe you can't deny Jesus. And then he's like, Jesus can be denied. Maybe Jesus runs out of steam after a while. And this paints a very interesting picture. Like, all right, Jesus shows up back there in the Christian era, super important for the time, got people through a very hard time. Maybe people had human culture had no way of establishing a symbol that forced them to accept logos uber alles. They could not accept logos and deny Satan as it came in such a black and white manner as Christianity forces them to do. And when cultures did this, they developed a supreme ability to moralize and to work and self-sacrifice that allowed them to create Europe, for example. What happens is that once you've achieved that, perhaps the boat is used and you must cast it aside. It's no longer useful anymore, and the symbol now needs to be changed. So Jung is saying that, like, that very, very possibly could have happened to Christianity. That's the flip side of what we're talking about. Maybe Christianity is dead, and we're just like scrambling for some sense of order and meaning because we can't hack the transition process. Jung is going to start talking about the transition process. It seems like something like that has happened. Now, there's many possibilities this could go down. Maybe Christianity is dead altogether. We need a new religion. Big idea. Like, you can't just go jumping into that one. Like, I know people hear that and they're like, yeah, man, I'm glad I heard those words. That's exactly what I want to do. I'm going to go on Twitter and start recruiting people. I'm going to go on YouTube, start making my channel or some shit like that. No, it's more like you got to start doing the basic psychological stuff and facing your fear of yourself before you can even start going in that direction. But maybe Jung is saying that the idea of Christ or the symbol has died and it needs to now be reborn. Maybe it won't be Christ per se, but see, Christ itself is not Jesus per se. Like, the man and the symbol are slightly separate. Now, they're mixed together for us because Jesus is our Christ. Jesus is ourself. But Christ is like literally the Greek word for that seat of the self. And Jung is saying that the Jesus, the man who sits on it, might change, or something about him might change. And this idea is that, all right, so the old Jesus image has died. And this symbol always changed. Like in the Roman Empire, when they first installed Christianity, Jesus was this like ripped dude, like a ripped dude on a horse, because the Romans love that shit. So he was just like, big juicy boyo. And then you see the Jesus that they show in like Ethiopia. He's like black he's just a black dude. And then you've got like the one in Ireland, like he's a ginger bloke. Well, like, he's not, but you know what I mean? It's like the symbol changes depending on the place in some sense. And so the symbol has changed, and it seems like the symbol died to a large extent. And that's obviously caused problems because that's allowed that we're still stuck with the dynamic of the symbol. We're not away from that. So even though the symbol has died, people have become anti-Christian, but it's not like they've become unique or original. They're still just anti-Christian. They're still just irrational. Like, they're just doing the opposite. It's still that rebellion. But what happens is, are we coming to a tension point where a new symbol will have to be born? It'll become so polarized from this old dynamic that a new Aion will have to come, and that Aion will be as like Christianity describes, a new Christ comes, and this time it's a warrior Christ with a sword, and he floats out of heaven and he condemns everybody and sets up the new Aion. Like, is something like that coming? And this is this what they meant when they did the Bible and they did Revelations? Is that what they were banging on about? They weren't banging on about like a world-ending scenario. Were they literally saying that we've studied these dreams that's going on in our culture, we've packed them together into this Bible, And when I study all the dreams in this Bible, it seems like they set up this tension between this Jesus and this Christ, and then you've got the anti-values to that. And this tension has to be resolved. It's like the two fish. The two fish burst out of each other, and they have to come back together. And them coming back together is going to have to result in a very violent revolution of some sorts, the way the memes work. And so is that whole dream version of reality inevitably going to have to come back together and bring us, as I said, it's going to happen in this very high level, but it's going to bring us along with it in a feeling level, and therefore in a cultural level, and therefore in a material level. And like the evidence suggested that that's what happened with the wars, is that as we started to run this simulation of anti-Christianity, more and more people became more and more like, you know, the wars happened and all that stuff. So are we going into this position where there is a inevitable challenge to this symbol because the symbol has died? Does it need to be reborn? And how much fire will that involve? There's the question.
Yeah. It's absolutely terrifying. It's like just a few things, and we'll crack on. It's like modern people. So if we're changing ions, and presumably a religion sits there at the top of the throne. It's been religion forever, but we're in the first non-religious age ever. So it's like, how would a religious figure sit at the top of the throne? So that's a good question. It's like, would modern people suddenly accept a messianic man? It's like, no, probably not. So what does it mean? It's like, maybe people are religious without knowing it, and the symbol doesn't have to be something overtly metaphysical. It could be something else. And you're absolutely right. It's like the next Aion we're going into, whether we crossed it in the 60s, whether we'll cross it in 2600, we don't know. It's like, it's the unification of opposites is the next Aion. So Christ and Antichrist, the unification of opposites. It's like, maybe what that means is a unification of science and religion. And maybe, and then this is what I keep going to, which is really bad. I'm like, maybe that's what Jung was. Because Jung, he died in the 60s, which is when the next Aion was meant to change. This book was this book written in the 60s? I don't know, sometime around there.
Yeah,
it's like, maybe that's what it is. Because what Jung was putting forward was, he's a scientist. And he was saying, so this science is really important, and we use it to extract out facts, but it's also rooted in values and myth. But the myth is also rooted in, it was deduced by science. So it's like an interplay between the two. So is individuation, whatever symbol that will be, is that going to be what sits the top of the next Aion? You know, an individual quest to confront the unconscious, where everybody becomes the hero, just as Christ lives within you and the kingdom of heaven is on earth. It's the same idea, but you've actually reached back using science to preserve it. So that therefore it's a unification of science and religion. I don't know. I'm just spouting stuff now because it's a really terrifying problem to be in. But there's definitely an aspect, and we can't throw this away, because people will listen to this and be like, well, Christ is bollocks, we're changing Aions, anything goes. Like, no. You have to go back into the past and pull it back up again. That's what everyone has always done. It's that character which always revives the tradition. You go back and you pull up what's correct. And you cannot just dispense with that. That's why I will not dispense with Christianity. And nobody should. It's a bad idea. It's a really, really bad idea. And Jung explains why it's a bad idea.
I'm sure I'm sure in some sense you could sort of dispense with Christianity if you were able to go down to your very self and discover that actually, all right, the Christian movement's over, if that was the truth. But no one's like, in order to do that, you'd have to go so deep into your unconscious that like no one who's seriously saying anti-Christian stuff has done that. It's not like, you know, it's like you have to dig deep. And when you don't even know what you'd find there, like it might not be in any way a frame of your reality. Because if it was truly original, it wouldn't be like, I'm anti-Christian. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, it's like, it's so much more complicated than that. And even as we said, these things are so heavily predetermined that people you're so trapped by this dream of history that it's unbelievable. This is what's scary about this. Jung's not saying that this is a luxury you have where you can just choose what you believe. You're trapped by the historical dream of your culture. Christianity, for example, was a final form of the Old Testament. The Old Testament was this giant historical dream of the Israelites where they're trying to figure out what was going on. They were warring with all these unconscious energies, and they had all these premonitions about a Messiah. And then this guy appeared in Jesus, and then that set up the new drama. And so will that come to its end? And like, has this Christian age, this Aion, set us up with a load of stories. Like this is probably what we're studying now. We're studying the Bible of the New Age, the New Testament age, and this is setting up all this stuff. And is it going to culminate now in a new figure, a new Messiah, which will be Jesus 2.0, the return, as they say, the return, and he will come down again, and it's from God. You know, it'll be a new symbol, and this will set us up for the next age, the Messianic age, as they say. But it'll be the age of Aquarius. And like, is that what's going to go on? That's going to be a fascinating idea. And what's so crazy is the symbol for this age is the idea of a little boy going up to the top of a mountain, and an eagle coming in the form of Zeus, in the form of a god, and lifting him up into heaven. What the fuck? Like, that's what it is, man. Jesus.
We're going to go up to heaven in this next age.
And you know what's even crazier about it is the dark side of that. So like all symbols have a dark side. The dark side of that symbol is the pedestry, the idea in ancient Greece where an old man would take a child and take him as a lover. That's the dark side of it. And if you look at what's going on in the modern culture, like pedophilia is ramped up a shitload. So there's a load of weird shit going on with men and kids. You know, you've seen like that 11-year-old transgender kid who's dancing for old men. So it seems like as we're moving into that transition point, the negative side of it's getting like really powerful, and it's going to obviously have a positive like do you see what I mean? There's like some type of dynamic going on there as well. Are we getting set up for that transition point? I don't know, mate.
What indeed. I'm going to read to the very end of the chapter so we can
please churn. Yes, I have a lunch to attend,
okay.
So we must hurry.
Have a lunch to attend. Jesus, it's time to go away. This is more important. Today, it is a real problem. What on earth such ideas can mean. The world, so far as it has not completely turned its back on tradition, has long ago stopped wanting to hear a message. It would rather be told what the message means. The words that resound from the pulpits are incomprehensible and cry for an explanation. How has the death of Christ brought us redemption when no one feels redeemed? In what way is Jesus a God-man? And what is such a being? What is the Trinity about? And the parthenogenesis, the eating of the body and the drinking of the blood and all the bloody rest of it. What connection can there be between the world of such concepts and the everyday world, whose material reality is the concern of natural science on the widest possible scale? At least 16 hours out of the 24, we live exclusively in this everyday world, and the remaining 8 we spend preferably in an unconscious condition. Where and when does anything take place to remind us even remotely of phenomena like angels, miraculous feedings, beatitudes, the resurrection of the dead? It was therefore something of a discovery to find that during the unconscious state of sleep, intervals occur called dreams, which occasionally contain scenes having a not inconsiderable resemblance to the motifs of mythology. For myths are miracle tales and treat of all those things which very often are also objects of belief. In the everyday world of consciousness, such things hardly exist. That is to say, however, until 1933, only lunatics would have been found in possession of living fragments of mythology. After this date, the world of heroes and monsters spread like a devastating fire over whole nations, proving that the strange world of myth had suffered no loss of vitality during the centuries of reason and enlightenment. If metaphysical ideas no longer have such a fascinating effect as before, this is certainly not due to any lack of primitivity in the European psyche, but simply and solely to the fact that the erstwhile symbols no longer express what is now welling up from the unconscious as the end result of the development of Christian consciousness through the centuries. The end result is a true antimimon pneuma, a false spirit of arrogance, hysteria, woolly-mindedness, criminal immorality, and doctrinaire fanaticism, a purveyor of shoddy spiritual goods, spurious art, philosophical stutterings, and utopian humbug, fit only to be fed wholesale to the mass of men today. That is what the post-Christian spirit
looks like.
Blessed
Christianity.
Be the word of the
I've a few notes here that I'd like to talk about. Christianity tamed the European psyche, but the primitive libido is the creative spark. Christianity is nihilism. So I think what I was trying to say there was originally, this is the story Nietzsche frames quite a lot, is that you had the strong blonde Celtic Germans that occupied Europe, and they're tall, physical beasts, but they're wild. They couldn't tame themselves with logos to build civilization, so they just ran around being healthy and strong and awesome. These are the pagans, essentially. And Christianity came along, and as Nietzsche said, in order to turn them into useful assets for civilization, it had to make them sick. It had to make them less healthy. It had to take them and take these beautiful, blonde, tall, strong men and put them inside monasteries, crouched over, studying scripts and stuff like that. It had to cook them to some extent. And this is for the greater good, if you will. But the problem was it had to chop off the creative spark. It had to make it lower. It had to take that libido, that energy, and stick them inside a monastery, a school system, and whatnot. And so Christianity, in essence, is a tool that needed to be used in order to destroy the natural impulses of man in order to favor something higher. But that abstraction was not well defined, and so in some sense, it was simply a realization from humanity that what we need to do is curb that creative spirit, but we don't have a goal in which to direct it towards. It was just a realization that we just need to cook our natural instincts to some extent, but we don't know why. And it was the step in the right direction, but it wasn't in any way a complete process. So they're like, all right, we need to curb our natural spirit, but we're not too sure what the goal we put there. What's the aim forward? And that's how Christianity could be nihilism, in that it's because it has no goal. It's simply a process. It may be dangerous in that it's holding us back. And I think that's what Nietzsche tapped onto. And for that reason, we did that for a long time. And then we started to realize that the goal must be the truth. Of course, Pontius Pilate was like, what is truth? Well, we went down that truth path, and then we suddenly realized that this grand theology that we've been told is not real. So this theology no longer satisfies our unconsciousness, the unconsciousness of the Aryans, if you will. And and for that reason, it's almost like they've woken up. They're like, you just cooked us for no reason, and now things are weird. Like, things are sort of dysgenic of some sort. We don't have a goal and all that. And so the Aryan subconscious boiled up again and collapsed onto something that made sense to it, which was paganism. And that reached out. And that's sort of what started happening there since the 19th century, where people started getting into magic. So they move out. Once the theology dies, the big ideas die, because there's no intellectual feeling, symbolic grounding for it. You default back into paganism. So it's not that paganism is wrong, as we said before. It's just that it's a lower form of operating. It's a lower operating system. It's effective, but it's tribal. And it's not that tribalism's wrong. I think this is something Jordan Peterson does a terrible job at explaining. It's not that tribalism and the tribal instinct is wrong. It's just that it's just the same with sex. It's not that sex is wrong. It's just that if you don't ennobilize that instinct to some extent, it becomes degenerate. It's the same with tribalism. It's not that tribalism is wrong, but it does hold you back from creating a greater civilization. The Christian empires required a trans-tribal theology. Nations require tribes to get together. And so in some sense, once that theology dies, you fall back to your lowest forms. And that's a big worry, because if you look at the world of identity politics, that's exactly what's going on. You have over in America is the best place to see this. The Democrats realize that there's no point trying to unify the nation. Instead, they're going to diversify the nation and then make everybody fall into their tribes: the blacks versus the Hispanics versus the Jews versus the whites versus the liberal whites versus the other whites and all that. And they will these small tribes, they will degenerate into them and control them from the top, like ride them like this toxic, massive wave of people, as opposed to unifying them under a theology, which would be something like Christianity, or making a neo-paganism or liberalism or something like that. So it's a very interesting problem that's going on there. Very interesting, because it's not it's people getting back in touch with that libido, and it's like, as we said, it in the 20th century that turned into some monstrous wars. So yes.
Yep. You did a very good job of that. I'm going to sum up, I guess, in a few lines. What Jung said is that Christian symbolism, we'll say Christ, doesn't represent what we're doing at the moment in the wars that we're doing, and that whole list of painful things he listed out. his hysteria, woolly mindedness, no morals, utopia, all this stuff. Christian symbolism doesn't represent it. So what does? If it's not Christian, what is it? Well, we're still in the coattails of Christianity. So maybe there's another character that we've ignored this whole time, that Christianity's ignored. And maybe that's its fatal flaw. It's actually caused it to collapse. Because if the self is psychic totality and Christ is just good, then it's missing its other half, its other hostile brother. He goes by many names. Sometimes he appears as a snake to tempt you to become like gods at the beginning of time, to cause you to fall into the fallen world. His name, of course, is Satan, the Antichrist. Maybe he's sitting atop the throne at the current times. We think we've escaped Christian mythology, but really we haven't. We've just fallen to his hostile brother.
That's a really, yeah, fuck. See, that's the other side, is that paganism was framed as Satan, wasn't he? By the way, people, we'll take questions now. If you have any questions, go to the chat on the right.
I'm not even lying. I have like such a headache at the moment after reading that. It's like, I feel like Nietzsche when he had his little collapse. It's like Jesus, animate divine. It's like, oh, Jesus.
James is saying he's going to go kiss a horse. That's what's going to happen next.
It did nothing wrong. It's like, what did he say when he kissed the horse? He proclaimed something. I can't remember.
He said it did nothing wrong. I think he said he did nothing wrong. He said the Hitler horse. he said I understand you. He said I understand you.
I understand you. Okay. Same thing, I guess.
Yes, so they frame. So yeah, we'll take questions on the chat. Lick your fingers, type that keyword, get groovy. What was I saying? Yes, so that idea of Satan being the king of the world right now is very interesting, because the paganism is framed as satanic, and people have a lot of trouble with this because they're like, oh, you're stopping us from thinking freely about stuff, and it's like, all right, well, let's think symbolically about why Satanism and paganism are essentially the same thing. And I think it's actually true. It's that if you frame logos versus eros, logic versus emotion, if you frame logos versus eros, you see logos as represented as Jesus. And that's the ability of your conscience, your will, and your mind to overcome your base primal desires. So if you were to just obey your feelings, you'd be like eating pizza all day and like, like fapping like all over the curtains, as we said before. Like that's all you do for your whole life. So there is this need for you to overcome your feelings in some sense. But your eros, your feelings, are also the source of all your creativity and your artist, like your artist side. There's something very romantic and sexy about it. This is what paganism deifies them as. There's like, it's not like your feelings are evil. They're one of your greatest assets. And so there's this problem because you need to stamp them into control, but you can't do it too much that you kill them off. Do you get what I mean? Like you can't just like smash your feelings and plug them so that you don't get any libido at all. There needs to be a sort of cultivating and scraping them and moving them towards something higher, something more valuable. But that was supposed to be positioned as whatever Christ represented, but we've lost that to some extent. And so we've now fallen back into our feelings. And the second you fall back into just pure eros, pure obedience to eros, you are sitting in the pagan world. And what's interesting is that the God who it's almost like if you don't take control of your feelings and point them all in one direction, your feelings take control of you and point you all in one direction. And that direction is chaos.
Yeah.
And who is the circular symbol, the single symbol that sits atop the throne of chaos? And that is the God of death, the God who's trying to drag everything into entropy and denial and death. And so, in some sense, unregulated obedience to eros brings you towards him, and he's a singular person. And since we've cast away that conception of the logos-orientated ordering principle of Christ, which pulls your feelings towards something more powerful. And maybe if you do Christianity wrong, you suppress your feelings. And so the correct way to do Christianity is to deify them towards a noble goal. But that's the one polarized. You've got in the middle all these pagan feelings, which people are falling back into, but that's pulling them down towards his sick gravity, where he will manipulate you because he's a liar. He's a deceiver. That's his name. That's why they call him the deceiver. He takes you through eros, through Faustian promises. You can have all the free sex and money and food you want. Nothing bad will happen. And you say, cool. And you take those little baby steps, and he gets you deeper, 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 until all of a sudden, suddenly all your prime ministers are homosexual, transgender people who rape children. And then you're like, whoa, what happened?
That is the most base defense of nofap I have ever seen in my entire life.
Holy shit, yeah, that's a pretty good, because when you think about it, it's like it's a very complicated process. It's like, how do you regulate this? Because you can't just say no to all your emotions, but in some sense you should. At some point you should just go like chaste and really see, can you do it, to develop that level of discipline and willpower. Like there must be some. It's a very difficult conversation to have, because people are very black and white about it. People are like, you must be all this, and then they end up being complete hypocrites and liars. Like, you probably get plenty of Christians who are like, I'm super Christian, but then like they, cheating their wife or something like that. And then you get loads of people who are like, I don't want to have any restrictions in my emotions at all. Feelings don't care about your facts. And then they just go all in on this stuff, and they become absolutely dysgenic monstrosities. You see it all over the place in the liberal movement. People who just have completely embraced taking the Kool-Aid on this shit, and it's just, they're like flabby, they're dyeing their hair all these weird colors, and they're just like sexual deviants. And it's like, look, do whatever you want, but don't tell me that you're happy or you're healthy, like, because you're not, and people can see it. Your mind is destroyed. Your body, you don't even look healthy at all. And so there's this weird thing, and it is that problem on the other end. It's like you're stringent, and so you've no creative vitality, because you can't obey those deep powers of your unconscious, which is what you need to do. And in order to do that, you have to go into your shadow, your fears, which is often your emotions. Like, yeah, fundamentally, in order to do unconscious stuff, you have to go into your eros. And so that might confront you with that idea of whatever is deep on this stuff. It's a very complicated problem.
Yeah, it is. It's incredibly complicated. It's like when you were mentioning like the real flabby people who dye their hair, and it's like, if you're a flabby person watching this who dyes their hair, I don't care. But it's like the idea that you look back into the past and you see the great men and women of the past, and you see Christ atop the throne. It's like, this is the legacy, and this is what we've built, and this is what this represents, truth. And then you pop forward another 2,000 years, you think people are going to be looking back on that way of being, the flabby, dyed-haired, can just have sex with everything that moves. You really think they're going to look at that and see this is really the nobility. This is really what's important. And everything else was all for nothing, all just restrictive for nothing. It's just a power structure. This is the way things should be. So you don't even know deep down, on the surface, complete and utter rubbish. It's like there is a hierarchy of values. There is something to strive for. And it's like, and at the base of it, everything you strive for, either towards Christ or it's towards Satan. Even if you get triggered at the use of the word Christ, it's like everything you're doing, because you can't escape it. You're a human being with a nature, and you'll go towards one or you will go towards the other. And most of you seem to be going towards Satan himself.
Like, imagine in 2,000 years if everybody gets down at this like altar and they're like, remember the blue head girl on Twitter? Remember?
It's not going to happen, is it?
Do you know what's very interesting is that you talk about the aversion, because we talked about words earlier. You're talking about the aversion to create the word Christ. Because do you have any idea how much I feel it when we're doing these lectures? Because it's very Christ heavy, and it's almost like talking about Christianity in an assertive way triggers a need in me to resist it, because it's like intellectually dishonest. It's almost like Christianity has been associated in my mind with a will towards ignorance. That's from reading too much Nietzsche. And I feel it viscerally. It freaks me out, because there's no other word. Like, I could be like paganism, Satan. I can just say Satan all day. It's fine. But Christ itself has this deep energy field around it that like clashes against me, because compared to that, it's such a high standard that it hurts me in some sense. And I can feel it viscerally in my body, like when we're talking about Christianity and if we're asserting Christianity is valuable, it has all these like negative emotions inside me. And I know that if I'm feeling that, it's magnified 1,000,000 times in other people in the world. And I've noticed this, dude. I'm like, I can talk about it. I'm pretty pro-Christian, but you can say the word to people and they'll just be like it's like there's a demon in them that reacts to that word. It's so weird, man. And it's in me to some extent. This is what I'm trying to describe here. Like I feel it in that sense and it freaks me out to some extent. It's like, how can a word be like that? That's weird. It's weird how that happens. But then I see it in others as well. And it's just like God is one. That's pretty hardcore, but Christ is unbelievably profound. People are just like disgusting. The only way they can properly deal with him is by laughing at him. That's insane, isn't it?
Yeah.
The only way they can actually have the concept in their head is by making fun of it. They can't take it seriously in any sense at all. And I think I was like that growing up because I was a degenerate soy boy. And when I watched Passion of the Christ, it's when I started to connect with the actual deep stuff behind it. It's been like, whoa, shit. When I saw what he did, and Mel Gibson is a fantastic director, I connect. It opened up a new part of my emotions. Was that part of this man suffered in a way that's unbelievable. Like he stood up, like they whipped him and he stood up and he says, "You will not break me." Oh my God, I'm feeling emotional now. It's so like it was so strong in that sense, but it was a strength of character that you just don't see anymore. Someone to get beaten and say, but you can rip my body apart. I don't care what you do to me. You can break every bone I have. You will not break my soul. You cannot do that. You cannot break the truth, and I am the truth. That is unbelievable. And when I got in touch with that, it brought it back to life. But there's still that weird thing. I must be from Nietzsche that I got it, where it's that aversion to just asserting that intellectually as reality. And I find that so strange because that's a very strange psychological phenomenon. And everybody I know has it to some extent. It's so weird.
Yeah, I feel the same thing as you to some degrees, because it's really difficult to suddenly say, I'm a Christian now, I believe in Jesus, for the reasons what we've just mentioned.
Yeah.
But like I'll say, for example, I'm reading the Bible now, and I've got a nice little note-taking app on my phone when I actually speak to it, and I'll realize I'm actually speaking Bible words to my phone, and my fiance will be like, "What the hell are you doing?" And I'll be reading it and going through it, and then I feel like it's like a phenomenology of something divine. It's like, here's some meaning here. This makes sense. And like when you read the story of Abraham, it's like a dude who made a pact with God and then went through 1,000,000 different things. It's like the Christ one was 1,000,000 different things, like the death of his father and famine and getting his wife made out with by Pharaoh, and he's asked to sacrifice his son, but he still did it to maintain his pact with the good. And it really hits you, and you're like that, and then you feel like I'm going to be like Abraham now. But then you go out into the modern world, and it all collapses immediately. You're like, well, no one else believes this. There's nothing regal. There's nothing holy around you. So it's like, it's almost like we have to do it together. So what's it Christ said, when there are two of you gathered together in my name, I'll be with you. So it's like, does that mean he's not with you by yourself? Is it too much? You know, so like, maybe what you need is to go and live in a Christian community where every street corner is a church. Everyone believes, and there's statues everywhere to always remind you of that sacrifice, rather than going out and have it almost subverted by the dominant energy. I don't know. But then that might be an excuse we're making up, because really we believe it's all bollocks. We just really want to cling on to it because it's some kind of defense mechanism against the modern world. And really we're being ignorant. And it's like, I don't think so. I don't think that's it. It's just the energy, the Christ energy is just, you can get it sometimes. Like when you pray or you read, or you feel that, because it's archetypal, it's within everyone. Everyone can feel it. You feel it sometimes, but it's not there enough. It's like, it's not quite enough gas in the car to maintain it. It's like, and I don't know what to do. And then there's Jung, who comes along and goes,
yeah, it might be rubbish.
And you're like, no, you're not trusting in you to bring me closer to Christ. Why you do this to me, Jung? It's like, oh, it's a difficult problem, man. It's a difficult problem.
It is unbelievable. Like I think the best you can do is actually face it with intellectual honesty, which I must give you credit. Like even steel manning the challenges to your own worldview there is, like, shows so much intellectual maturity that most people just can't hack. Because even being able to entertain that other side, it just shows that you're able to get out of that prison. Because like you will meet people who'll just be like, no, 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 Christ is fake. It's brain. This is what astounds me about this, is that the way it works in my head, the fear I have is that if I accept these symbols, I will get brainwashed by them. If I just like leap all into them, I'll get brainwashed by them. But I know the reason why I think that is because I've been brainwashed. That freaks me out. That freaks me out. So it's like, and I don't think it's like, a them. This is where it gets weird. As I said, if you follow that eros and all that, there is a sort of organizing force behind them, the force of chaos, the organizer of chaos. I feel that it's sort of his brainwashing that makes you do that, because the one thing that he cannot have you do is go towards ultimate principled order, and that's so that means that you have to, like, if you're in his hands, I guess this is what they mean by we are fallen. If you're in the hands of the fallen one, ultimate principled order will like viscerally freak you out, because it's the same ways that I guess if you were Jesus, you would just like, Satan would come up and be like, I give you the world, and you're like, get the fuck away from me. You'd be disgusted by it. There's that type of dynamic going on, which freaks you out, because it makes me realize whose hands, who I take a knee to. And that's a scary thought, because when they layer on top of it the idea of the afterlife, which you're not supposed to believe in either, does that mean that like all these little subtle feelings that you have now, that you're like, they're just feelings, whatever. But then you die, does it become like real? The simulation is over, and they're like, who did you choose? And then you're like,
no.
And then you realize you're sitting there with the god of death, and he's like, you fucking idiot. Now I have you, you fucking idiot. And Jesus is like I literally came down and died to show you. I was like, here I am. I came down to literally came and died to prove it. And you didn't believe me. So you can go fuck off. You think you're getting into heaven.
God, Jesus. I might die in a minute. This is getting too much.
Don't die.
Then if I die now, who will I be? Who will I be at the foot of? Christ or Satan? So probably Satan.
See, that's the scary thing. It's those subtle emotions and analysis of them. You're like, what's going on here? I don't know. I think the healthiest thing, I think what Jung says, is that you just got to be conscious of it. That's the thing, the advice he gives. That's the first step. And so many people aren't. Like, this is the scariest thing. People know based on a layer of unconsciousness, which makes me think, man, he has you on lock. Like, maybe if like we died, Jesus would sit down and sort of say, all right, I'll give you 5 minutes of defense, but I'm probably going to let you go to Satan anyway. But it's like, it's you're sort of got a chance, a hope. St. Peter might be like, go on, God, let him in. But then if you're like completely unconscious of the demon, you don't even go to that place. You just straight down into hell. It's just like when you die, the hole opens up in the floor and you just get zipped down into it. Who knows?
And then there's a cartoon cat from Tom and Jerry who's laughing maniacally at you. Are you
yeah, man. Oh, jeez. Questions. How is the UK going with Brexit, James? And how are you holding out on me? There's a Dublin Stefan.
Yeah, don't talk to me about Brexit. It's quite upsetting at the moment. This is the thing with checking the news. Brexit's been in the news for the last 2.5 years, so it's not really news, but it's not looking good. It's really not looking good. I think I was asked that like a couple months ago on one of these things, and it's like it wasn't good then either. I as far as I'm concerned, it's that we leave without a deal. That's it. We'll be fine. Done. Bye. But for some reason, Parliament wants to keep infighting. So I'm not optimistic about it. Either we'll remain as part of the European Union, which completely overturned the public's vote, or we'll leave and then everyone in Parliament will resign because they don't like the fact that we've left without a deal. So it's just not a good situation.
If they say we're not doing Brexit, do you think, like, surely England will end up in riots?
If it was a riot, it would be from the north, and they would go down on the south. Yeah, because most people want Brexit. This is what I voted for Brexit. And it gets you really sick. Especially, I've told the story when a professor told me that I should die for voting for Brexit, and that's enough to really create resentment. You know, especially because he's who I want to be one day. He's in that position. We're constantly told all the time how bad Brexit is, how it wasn't really the people's decision. It's like, yes, it was. If you didn't want this, don't do a referendum in the first place. It was silly. So if Brexit doesn't happen, you won't see the end of it. If it was a revolution, it would come from up north, and it wouldn't go very well. It really wouldn't go very well. There would be blood.
Fuck. Yeah, man. Yeah. Well, as I said, like, just speaking of all we're just talking about here, I'll drop a bit of news that I heard that I found just absolutely astounding. And James didn't like it too much either. There was a man from Iran who converted to Christianity recently, and he wanted to seek asylum in the UK. And the UK denied him access to the UK, to the United Kingdom. They didn't allow him to come over because Christianity is not a peaceful religion. And they quoted 3 passages from the Bible to prove it. And so they expelled him from it. And I'm just starting to get a feeling that the British state is in a very, very, very bad place. So that's something to think about. I'm moving slowly back to the idea of monarchy. I'm like, I don't think having a rulership like that was a bad thing. As people, I'm going to study it more to try to figure out. But I'm moving away from the idea that because democracies think too short term. Whereas if you have an ethnic monarchy, yeah, you get a bad monarch and it's kind of shit. But at least it's a family that's ruling and it's explicit. Like, I think we're probably ruled by families in the shadows, which is just shit, because then you don't know who rules you. It's very dangerous. Like Satan, it's like, who the fuck's doing that? So
yeah, I don't know about monarchy, to be honest, but what's definitely clear about monarchy is if you look back at European history, it was pretty good. That's what I'm going to say there.
The Christian king.
It's not as if it's the stupidest idea in the world. It's like, well, we don't get to have a say, and it's like, okay, it wasn't that bad. I'm not saying I'd go ahead and support it, but it really wasn't that bad because we got to this point.
Yeah, and like Russia was the richest kingdom in the world, built on monarchies. France, unbelievable kingdom built on monarchies. Like, it's a hard one. That's a very hard one to figure out. It's not like, and the church sponsored monarchy. So the Catholic Church, separate from the monarchies all working around it. Something really powerful happened there. We just haven't figured it out yet. So it's a hard one to know. Let's move on from the talking about monarchies, though. How's things in Dublin? Things are grand, man. Like, things aren't, black pill, they're terrible, but there's a slow creep going on where I'm going to essentially say satanic communists are slowly eking their way into the giant states that we have built, trying to take control of the people. So I see that all the time. Generally speaking, things become slowly different, but nothing's bad. Like, it's not like fucking hell out here. Like, I really enjoy living in Ireland and Dublin. It's grand. So do you use logos to reduce eros? How do you balance it?
Use logos to reduce eros? Well, yeah, it's like, and that's actually a really good question. Because if it's like, if Christ is logos and Satan is eros in that particular image you're painting at the end there, it's like, where the hell's the room for eros? It's like, that is a good question. But it's like, if taking it out of those big things in your own personal life, it's like, eros will not lead you in good places. Eros is good. Imagine eros is like a fire, right? And fire is a useful and a good thing if it's controlled. If it's not controlled, then it goes and burns down forests and kills you, and you die. You die of carbon monoxide. It chokes everybody else around you, burns them all down. It's not good. But if you have that fire, then it also keeps you warm and alive, but you've got to control it. So use logos to put as many boundaries as you can around the eros. So it's like you would have, so in Christian theology, for example, it's like, and don't keep bringing up Christianity, I guess, but it's like, eros would be, your own creative output is fine, your own vocation is fine, and then, but those real visceral things, it's like you do them in the marriage bed, for example. And food, we'll like ritualistically act out not eating food just so we can prove that we have control. So it's like, basically ask yourself the question, is my eros ruining me in any particular domain? If so, bye eros. Like, control.
Yeah. You can also think of it this way, is that you're given all these emotions: desire for sex, which is desire to create, desire for food, desire to create as an artist or something like that. These will pull you apart if you don't steer them all in one direction. And that direction usually has to be a purpose. You always hear people talk about a purpose. So it's like, what do you want out of your life? What's the meaning of your life? And it's a very interesting question. You're asking, what's the purpose? That's actually logos. What's the logos of my life? Why do I exist? And if you start asking that question, what's the meaning? You start asking the question, what's the meaning of all my emotions? Is my will to sex helping me? Like, is it? Maybe I'll be better having 3, like, just say you just want to be a pimp. All you want to do is just like as many girls as you can. Maybe you'd be better having 2 or 3 girlfriends that are super hot, the best looking girls you'd ever find. and then regulating that and focusing on building a business that allows you to get the best looking girls you can, like work in the model industry or something like that. Maybe that would be the logos there. You know what I mean? And you're starting to steer the instinct in a direction. And then the question becomes the highest level of meaning of questions. How do you move up in that? Like, pitch alert, but I am preparing a course discussing this quite a lot. I've been chewing on this dynamic between logos and eros and looking at this idea of how you develop emotional intelligence in a really based way, as opposed to just a wankery self-help way that I see a lot. And it does seem to come from that idea that all of our emotions have meaning. All of our emotions have a logos. All of our emotions have a telos, if you will, a point. Our resentment wants us to understand that there's something wrong, that we are getting bullied in some sense. But it wants us to also understand that we're getting bullied not because the person is evil, which is what our resentment teaches us to do. It wants us to destroy that person. It wants us to teach us we resent them because we are weak. And the answer to resentment, I guess you could say the logos answer to resentment, is to develop strength, is to take that energy and point it in the right direction, which is towards strength. Do you get what I'm saying? Envy is the same. Envy is jealousy. Instead of saying, I hate that person, that's a bad rendition of that emotion. You must take that envy, not deny the envy, and say, I am jealous of that person only because they are the ideal of what I wish to become. And then you can start crafting yourself in that direction as well. You develop a secret admiration. You don't have to tell them, but that type of way. All of your emotions have that type of logos to them. And emotional intelligence to me seems to be more about understanding the message as opposed to anything more elaborate in that sense. And that's the way I'd say you're sort of taking all these fires, as James said, and you're cultivating them. You're sculpting them towards something higher, more powerful, and more, shall we say, Christ-like. I don't give a fuck if that word has got power in it. Yes, Christ.
Hey.
So that'll be my spin on that. I will have I'll pitch again. I'll have a product at some point that you could check out, and hopefully I'll articulate that in visceral tapestry level detail.
Have you got to pitch in a fine English accent?
It's quiet. I only pitch like this.
It's the most splendid product, the most marvelous product. I'm sure. I have no idea what it is, but I'm sure it's fun.
Here's from Wise Girl. But you said Christianity disciplines people to civilization. So what would have motivated the Greeks and the Romans? It's a good question. I think the only answer I could give to that is that paganism didn't lack logos. Like the whole pantheon of paganism was, you had the lower gods and they all obeyed Zeus, the higher god, and Zeus was the logos of that. But then I think Christianity took it to another level. I think Christianity was of a higher logos in some sense. I think Christianity pedestalized logos overall, and that allowed it to carry on for millennium. Whereas Zeus was a bit of he was a hoe. Do you know what I mean? Like, he wasn't logos. He was sort of a highest form of that, but he still had plenty of vices, if you will. So Christianity just absolutely went over the top virtue. Like, there's no cucking out of this. You either do it right or you don't do it at all. And so that's why I think Roman and Greek society could have grown really powerful. I'm sure that's why it happened, because it had a decent lump of this, just like Islam did. But at some sense, it lost its steam because it let this stuff go at some point. You know, that's my spin on it. Now, that's me reducing history to something very simple. It's probably way more complicated, but that'd be my take on that.
Yeah, I would also agree. It's like, yeah, it wasn't as if logos wasn't there, because I mean, logos was a Greek word. So what John says is like, the word was God. So the logos is God. They equal same thing. So the highest possible thing is logos, whereas that wasn't within Greece or Rome. So therefore, the hypothesis is, and it seems completely and utterly sound, is that once you deify that above all else, as if nothing else matters, it's just that, it will enable you to go and create or reach the kingdom of heaven within you and outside of you.
That's good. I'm going to have to rush this a little bit. James, show me the North Pole photos. We've a bit of conspiracy going about what happened in the North Pole. If Christ is eternal, this is from Amit Arun again. If Christ is eternal and so is Satan, both living in meme space as archetypes, then is this Christ versus Satan drama eternal in nature? then what's then the reason to have people living in time and space? Oh Jesus. I'm only going to be able to deal with is it eternal in nature? The symbols may not be. The pictures, the imago you paint over it may not be eternal. And this is what I think we're dealing with now, is that it sort of seems like these ideas are part of reality. There is a war between emotions and truth. That's never going to go away. That's a metaphysical level idea. But that's so difficult for us to perceive. We need symbols in order to wrestle with these. So Christ and Satan are our current set of symbols. As much as people want new sets of symbols, this is what we're trying to do. It's like, how do we get new sets of symbols? It's like, man, that's such a fucking complicated idea. It's like, how do you create great art? It's the same question. How do you create the greatest art? It's that big of a question. And so but the drama is most certainly has to be eternal. Maybe our conceptions of these ideas will change, but if we get them wrong, we tend to destroy society. So that's something we got to be wary of.
Yeah, so yeah, you're completely right about the eternal thing. And so as for why we're existing in time and space, it's like if you take it out of the realm of theology, it actually makes it quite easy. It's like we evolved over God knows how many years. Here we are, and these archetypes come over a very, very, very long period of time. So they're how we've used our brains, whatever our psyche is, to interpret reality. So as far as we can tell, as a structure of reality, because we have our little interpretive structure in our heads that goes around life, you will never, ever, ever get away from the Christ and Satan dynamic. Now, whatever the archetype beneath them, the archetype of like the hostile brothers, basically, but on the deepest possible level, that's what's going on. If you then want to put it in the realm of metaphysics, why we're in time and space, it's like, well, many, many, many possible answers for that.
Give us one sec there, Jimmy.
That's fine. So what Stefan has gone off to do is his prostitute has come along and knocked on the door. He's just left the room and he's left me to talk to you fine people. I'm gonna try and open up the chat, see if I can crack on without this young man. Also, make sure you put down below who your favorite of the two boyos is, because that's gonna be most important. So how many of you have chosen Christ or Satan? Because I bet some of you boyos are way more inclined to choose Satan over Christ purely because that's the way you are inclined.
Jimmy Boyo. Hello?
Hello, you back?
I'm going to have to bounce. That lunch has showed up.
All right.
Okay. People, very sorry about all that. If you want to keep this up, I got to go because I'm the host and I'm going to have to take James with me. This is the end. Sorry about that. Sorry about not getting to those last questions. MGTOW, feminism, very complicated stuff. I'll talk about it all some other time. Hello, Skip. Talk to you later, people. Bye.